I didn't quite finish with Aristotle's friendships of pleasure last time. There are just three more points I want to make about them. The first at the top of page 3 of this 4-page handout. Because of pleasure, in fact, even base people can be friends with one another, as can decent people with base ones. So what he's saying there is that the moral character of a person doesn't play any role really in pleasure, a friendship of pleasure. Now, this may seem to contradict the last point just a little bit, but not very good people, base people, vicious people even, can be friends with each other on the basis of some shared pleasure. And likewise, these friendships can tolerate a great difference in the moral characters of people. So you can have a good person who is friends with someone who's really not a very good person on the basis of this shared pleasure. You don't have to believe that someone has a good character in order to play chess with them if you're really passionate and take great pleasure in playing chess. Okay. And this point will become clear, this next point will become clear when we talk about friendships of utility. Friendships of pleasure and friendships of utility are scarcely ever joined together. And it's because the people we share pleasures with and the people we find useful to us tend not to overlap. They tend not to be the same people. And finally we have this factor of the number of friends. How many friendships of pleasure can you have? And the truth is, there is no limit. How many different things can you take pleasure in? How many people can you share a passion for Green Day with, or Coldplay? And there isn't any practical limit to the number of friendships of pleasure you can have. So now we have to go back and talk in more detail, maybe not as much detail actually, but to then use friendships of utility as a contrast case. Now, friendships of utility, so I'm back on page 1 on the second column, which we'll then compare and contrast with the first column, and we'll do the same thing with friendships of virtue. Okay. First thing to notice is friendship of utility is likewise an incomplete friendship. Now, as I said in the last video, you can think of a friendship of utility as a friendship in which a friendship of mutual benefit, right? So I benefit someone else, they benefit me. There's a reciprocity, we call it, or a mutuality to the benefit, but also it's an incomplete friendship, like the friendship of pleasure. And it's an incomplete friendship because I relate to the person from a fragment of myself to a fragment of yourself, right? So if there is a certain store nearby where I really like to buy the kind of shirts that I like, right? They're useful to me, I'm useful to them. I get shirts from them, they get money and probably some recommendations, maybe even Yelp reviews from me. And so there's a mutual benefit there. If I felt like, this goes to a later point, but if I felt like they were cheating me, they weren't giving me a good quality product, they weren't trying to solve a problem when it came up, or that their prices were not fair, then I would say the benefit is not mutual, and so there's a difference, and so I'll move on. And so that the next point is that these friendships, like the friendships of pleasure, so this point and the point before it are the same, these are prone to dissolve easily, right? Because our needs change. Now, these are based on needs rather than pleasures. And probably these last a bit longer. These friendships of mutual benefit or utility last somewhat longer because our basic needs last longer. So we're thinking especially of food, clothing, shelter, medical care, and safety or security. Okay, those things won't really change throughout our lives, although exactly what we need for them might change. Okay, so second page. These friendships are more typical of older people. So I mentioned retirement last time. So you're not likely to share information back and forth with your friends about who is the best stockbroker, who is the best investment advisor in your circle, what are the best financial instruments to use for retirement, what's the best way to repair your house, a particular thing that's going wrong in your house, that sort of thing. And so older people get less involved in pleasure and more involved in utility, right? More involved in things that are useful and beneficial. And so Aristotle says the older people tend to pursue what's advantageous. So you're looking for some profit, you're looking to better your condition in life, you're not just looking for pleasure. There are exceptions among young people, there are exceptions among older people, but for the most part, this is the same. Okay? So that's a contrast with friendships of pleasure, right? Friendships of pleasure, more characteristic of younger people. Friendships of utility are more characteristic of older people. But the second point is also a contrast. Such people scarcely ever live together, since sometimes they're not even pleasant to each other, right? So I might have a favorite dry cleaner, right? But that doesn't mean that I love spending time with my dry cleaner. In fact, I tend to minimize those as much as possible. A quick phone call, right, is what I prefer. And that's because I don't think we really have anything else in common. We don't take pleasure in the same things, and so we don't necessarily take pleasure in hanging out together. Now, you might say that's an odd kind of friendship. This is also a way that Aristotle's use of the term friendship doesn't overlap so closely, doesn't correspond so closely with our normal sense of friendship. These friendships, because they're not based on pleasure, they're based on mutual benefit, mutual usefulness to one another. They don't necessarily involve wanting to live together. If you found just the perfect place to, let's say, buy bracelets from that you love, a type of bracelets or earrings from, or wallets or something like that, watches, you wouldn't necessarily want to invite that person out for a drink, much less recruit them as a roommate, right? So that's a contrast with friendships of pleasure, but the next couple of things, they are vulnerable to slander, mistrust, and the fear of injustice, just as friendships of pleasure are, and possibly more, right? Because the moment someone suggests that there may be cheating involved, that this person is not trustworthy, unless you live in a very small town where you don't have many options for, let's say, where you can buy something from, or who's going to do the plumbing work on your house, as soon as there is some sense of mistrust, you form the conclusion, maybe this is not equal. Maybe I'm paying for more of a service or merchandise than I'm actually getting in return. And so when he says they're vulnerable to slander, mistrust, and the fear of injustice, that friendships of utility are and friendships of pleasure are, what he's saying is because of the basis of the friendship, it's not whole person to whole person. The moment you think it's not equal, it's gotten out of balance somehow, you're probably going to end it and move on. And for all of the reasons I've already named, the friendship of utility is also quite understandably a defective form. We talk about it as a friendship because it has some things in common with complete friendship, that friendship of virtue that we're going to learn more about in the next video. So this one doesn't get too long. Turn over to So even when I'm recording videos, I'm not free from notifications. Sorry about that. Turn over to page 3. Because of utility, in fact, even base people can be friends with each other as decent people with base ones. Bad people find no enjoyment with each other unless some benefit might come of it. Base people will be friends because of pleasure or because of utility, since that is the respect in which they are alike. That's what they share. That's what the friendship is based upon. So you may not, now we're doing a bit more of this these days, but you may not necessarily look at that person you buy your favorite clothes from, or that company or organization you buy your favorite clothes from, and ask, what is the moral character of the person who leads that company and makes decisions in that company, right? You may not pay attention to that because what you're looking at is the benefit, the mutual benefit, right? But there's also a reason why you may not want to hang out too much with that person is you don't exactly know if that's a good person or not. And you may not want their bad qualities or vicious qualities, as Aristotle would call them, to rub off on you. Again, Aristotle makes this point, friendships of pleasure and friendships of utility are scarcely ever joined together. It would be accidental, it would be a mere coincidence if someone that you had a friendship of pleasure with also turned out to be useful to you. And this is going to be one of the points of contrast with a friendship of virtue, where usefulness and pleasure are going to play a role, even though the friendship is not based on that. And final point about friendship of utility. It's possible for many people to please someone, but it's also possible for many people to be useful to someone. Now again, since our needs are fewer than our pleasures, probably we're not going to have as many friendships of utility as we would have friendships of pleasure, but there's also no practical limit, right? You don't say, well, I already have one person I buy food from because they have really good fruit. I'm not going to go to someone else because they have really good handmade pasta, right? We don't say things like that because it's not cheating, so to speak, on the fruit and vegetable dealer to go to the next store to buy pasta. We can have as many friendships of utility as we want without diminishing any of the other friendships of utility. And so next time we'll move on to complete friendship, these friendships of virtue.